welcome to Strictly Money at the News Forum, where all voices matter. I'm Saijal Patel. In the financial world where trillions of dollars are at stake and competition is fierce, never has it been more important to understand your customer base and deliver the right experience to them. Well, JD Power is out with its 2022 Wealth Management Digital Experience Report. And to share its findings is Mike Foy. He's Senior Director of Wealth Intelligence there. Hi, Mike. Great to have you on.
Hi, Saijal. Great to be here.
So I guess before we delve into the findings, can you just briefly mention JD Power's work in the financial space and why this particular study was conducted? Because I think most people would affiliate the company with the auto sector.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we got our start, as you say, in the automotive industry 50 years ago. But what not as many people know is that our second largest industry is financial services. And we've been surveying North American investors for over 2 decades now to try to understand really what's driving their behavior, what their preferences are, what kind of experiences they're looking for. And the study that we just released is really the latest survey that we've done specifically on Canadian investors and around their preferences in terms of their digital experience.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the findings because one of them obviously was that mobile apps and websites have increasingly become the first resources that investors turn to take care of their financial affairs. Not really surprising, though, considering that we are in a digital age and a lot of people are, they're attached to their phone. But Mike, what I found that, what stood out for me was sort of that level of satisfaction that was associated with each. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So again, yeah, like you say, no surprise that we see more digital usage, and we also see, what we might call a demographic divide, right, where we see among younger investors, next generation investors, not only higher rates of adoption of digital and specifically mobile, but where when we look at boomers, we tend to see that they are roughly equally satisfied whether they are on mobile apps or whether they are on the web. Um, Gen Y in particular has a really strong channel preference for the mobile app. Um, so you can see there, we're actually looking at, this was a North American study. We looked at both Canadians and folks from the US. And you can see in both countries that trend was there, that overall the app had higher preference
Hmm.
than the web. But that was really driven by younger investors. And you'll also note from this graph that we see that Canadian investors are a little less satisfied. They give lower scores to their brands in general than their American counterparts.
Okay, and I want to get into that. If we bring up that board again, there are numbers attached to it, right? And I understand this is the Net Promoter Score. Um, we talk about that quite a bit in the industry, but I think for our viewers, a lot of people wouldn't understand what that is. Can you quickly explain what it is and why it's relevant to the digital experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are actually overall satisfaction scores out of 1,000 point scale. They're very highly correlated to what you mentioned, which is Net Promoter Score. And Net Promoter Score is really so important, and it's become such a pervasive customer experience metric, not only in financial services but beyond, because it measures how likely a customer or a client is to recommend your brand to a friend or colleague. And so, referrals are such a critical part of how financial services companies attract new clients. So, look, really understanding the digital impact on that Net Promoter Score is critical.
Okay, we just have a minute until the commercial break. So, what do people use primarily for apps versus website? Is it simple things like banking, or is it checking on investments?
Yeah. So again, well, coming back to the digital divide or the demographic
Hmm.
divide issue, what we find is that usage is quite different, right? So boomers generally are just doing quick things like checking their balance or their portfolio performance. But what we see from particularly Gen Y investors is that they are much more likely to really expect what you might call feature parity between the online experience they have and the mobile experience they have. So they're doing things like research interactive tools, educational content. They're using a much richer feature set on a mobile device than we see among older investors.
Welcome back. Mike, before the break, we were talking about this sort of generational divide, what younger generations want from apps and website versus older generations. What features are the ones that bring the most satisfaction versus dissatisfaction?
Yeah, so I think across all users, there's some commonality here. So one is just making the experience as frictionless as possible, right? So easy to log in, easy to navigate and find the content that you're really looking for critically, and ensuring that the responsiveness and the speed of the experience is there. So those are some of the most critical aspects of the experience. In terms of some specific features, especially when we look at mobile apps, things like being able to easily set up and manage alerts and stock screeners. Those are some of the things that we see having really high impact on satisfaction, because those are things where the mobile app specifically has some inherent advantages over a laptop, in that, as you said earlier, we're sort of carrying these things around with us all the time.
Okay. Um, I have this saying, follow the money, right? And so I'm a slight skeptic. And what I mean by that, Mike, is okay, younger generations like apps, and I can see there is an argument to invest a lot in that. There aren't necessarily the ones I think that have the wealth. It's typically the baby boomers who have the bulk of it. Is that a valid argument? Are you seeing something different?
No, I mean, it's absolutely true. But as you know, we have this great wealth transfer, right, which is gets a lot of attention. Which across North America, something like $30 trillion is going to change hands generationally over the coming decade and beyond. And I think the thing that firms need to be thinking about is the long term future, right? Because if you wait until Gen Y inherits those assets or becomes high net worth, it's going to be much more difficult to attract them, because by that point they may have developed a strong, loyalty or brand affinity to another provider. So I do think it's really incumbent on brands to engage with the younger demographics and really to attract them now, and then evolve the services they provide over time as they grow wealthier and their wealth management needs become more complex.
Yeah, makes sense. The other thing that stood out for me, Mike, is that a lot of Canadian investors aren't using the wealth mobile apps. It was something like 55% full service. So those that work with an advisor, and about 40% of the self directed investors say they actually haven't had any mobile interactions in the past 12 months. Why do you think that is? And maybe how does that compare to the US?
Yeah, it's interesting because we see that the adoption rates are significantly lower in Canada than they are in the U.S. for wealth apps. I don't think that has anything to do with consumer preferences being different. A third-party survey we saw earlier this year estimated that the average Canadian consumer now spends on average 4.4 hours per day on their mobile phone on apps, which is actually a little bit more than Americans do. So I don't think it's about consumer preferences being different. It's more about, I think US firms as a whole are a little bit more mature in terms of how their digital experience that they're delivering, how that's evolved in recent years. And Canadian firms, I think to some degree, are playing catch up. But it is really important, as we said, that I think brands really do think about the digital experience as a differentiator and not just a check the box exercise that, okay, we need a mobile app, so let's put one out there. It's really an opportunity to differentiate your experience and to drive greater engagement with your clients.
Okay. Another minute before the next break. How important is data privacy, and how does that play into maybe some of the resistance?
Yeah, it's important. I mean, we see that a significant number of Canadian investors are concerned about the security of their data, whether it's through apps or whether it's through websites. And this is something actually that we didn't see a big demographic divide on. So it's a concern that exists among both younger and older investors. And I think it's important for firms not only to ensure that they have the appropriate security for data, but that they're effectively communicating that to their clients and providing aspects of the experience that reassure and provide confidence in investors that their data is in fact secure, whether they're interacting through a mobile phone or whether they're using their website.
Okay, another commercial break, and we'll be back in two. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm here with Mike Foy of JD Power. Mike, do you have a sense of the impact or correlation that this would have on users' financial health? And what I mean by that is, a lot of people want everything at their fingertips, right? The immediate access and the gratification, but it might not always translate into them building wealth or reaching their financial goals per se.
Yeah, no, I think what we do see is that when investors are using digital tools, particularly for educational content and for things like planning tools, that they are more confident in achieving their goals, and that they're in a better position with respect to achieving their goals than if they're not digitally engaged. Generally speaking, we see that this is true whether or not they work with a financial advisor as well. So we looked at things like in our research, whether folks who work with an advisor had done a financial plan, a formal plan with their advisor, and also whether they had interacted with digital planning tools. And what we found was that the folks who had both of those pieces, right? So they had both a plan that was developed with the help of a financial professional, but they also had the opportunity to interact digitally with planning tools. Those folks were most highly satisfied, most confident in their ability to achieve their goals. So it really, we feel like the digital experience is something that complements rather than replaces the need for professional advice and guidance.
Okay, so we're talking about the Opti channel experience here. Is that it?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's really, Opti channel again, we think about delivering the right experience to the right client in the right channel. And again, that's going to depend on the individual client's preferences, but having that availability is critical.
Yeah, so I guess it brings me to another point, and you've touched on this. There's a myth sometimes that millennials or younger generation don't value advice and they prefer digital. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true that it's a myth. Yeah,
Mm.
there's a myth that boomers don't like digital, and there's a myth that millennials don't want advice. They want to do everything digitally. I think both are untrue. And what we see consistently is that younger investors do seek out and value advice, but that they are really looking for, in some cases, a different kind of relationship where they play a more active role, right? So we have more what we might call validators among younger investors who, yes, they want to work with a professional advisor, but they also want to maybe do some of their own research and bring some of their own ideas to the table. So they're less likely to be true delegators that just want the advisor to make decisions on their behalf. But that certainly doesn't mean that they don't seek out and value advice, both in digital form, but also delivered, through a relationship with a traditional advisor.
And I think that's a really important point, Mike, because there's a lot of pressure on financial advisors to provide that value that perhaps the digital experience doesn't give them, right? Because digital experience tends to be a little bit more transactional. You get the snapshot. And you and I have been on a panel discussion, and we've talked about the spectrum with financial advice. Can you talk about that? Because what we found, what you found, JD Power found, was that a lot of the advice out there from advisors is still functional. It's still transactional.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think whether we look in Canada or the US, a very significant number of full service investors are really still getting, what you might call functional or transactional advice. So it's much more, it's narrowly focused on investments. It's more reactive. And I think, to your point, with the emergence of more lower cost digital solutions, I think advisors who are, whose business model is predicated on that kind of functional advice, really are in trouble from a long-term perspective. And what's really critical is that advisors move more towards what we talk about as comprehensive advice, right?
Hmm.
Where they're providing holistic planning, where they have a deep understanding of their clients' goals and objectives, and they're really providing and delivering a set of products and services that meet a broad range of a client's needs.
Okay. We'll continue this conversation. We're going to take another quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Mike, you were talking about the wealth transfer piece a little bit earlier. Here, I think we have just over $1 trillion in wealth transfer in Canada underway. You mentioned 30 trillion throughout North America. The customer facing piece, and you touched on the comprehensive advice. I think it just becomes so much more relevant, doesn't it? The degree of proper planning that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the elements of comprehensive advice is really that you're providing advice not to just an individual, but really to their whole household. And so that would include, potentially a spouse or partner, but also importantly, a next generation beneficiary. So I think as we think about comprehensive advice, an integral element of that is about becoming the bridge between your current clients and the next generation. And the wealth transfer is a very challenging thing for individuals as well, right? So there's lots of emotional issues involved, privacy issues involved, and financial advisors really have a unique opportunity to position themselves as a kind of a facilitator of those challenging conversations. And it's something that we see research supports. It not only benefits the long-term health of the practice to be able to retain those assets as they
Yeah.
pass intergenerationally, but it also improves the quality of the current relationship with the client.
Do you think advisors get it though? Because there seems to be a lot of hesitancy, and you wonder why.
Yeah, there is. I think there's a lot of different reasons. I think the payoff maybe quite long term. It may be that they just don't have the kind of relationships that would enable them to have some of these difficult or challenging conversations. But it's something that is a big opportunity, I think, for advisors to do more of.
Yeah, and you wonder if fees or paying for the service is an issue, whether just the financial model of providing that type of advice also is an issue.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about fee transparency and understanding. We know that, even with all of the increased disclosures that we've seen in recent years, that most Canadian investors still don't really fully understand the fees that they pay. And, the only way that's really going to change is for advisors to do a more effective and consistent job of explaining not only the fees that they're being charged, but really helping them to understand how those fees translate to value. It's not just about improving their returns on their portfolio. It's got to be a more comprehensive value proposition and story that advisors are communicating to both prospects and to existing clients.
Yeah. How do you, Mike? How do you see the wealth management space evolving then, when there is a lot of competition? There's a lot of pressure to add value at a low cost. What do firms need to think about if they actually want to retain loyal customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is really helping is really sort of, on the full service side is really, attracting, training, and developing advisors that are able to really move towards delivering that more comprehensive advice model. And then I would say also is for firms to especially the big banks and so on, to provide a continuum of service models that can evolve along with the investor's needs over time, right? So being able to provide a scalable, low cost solution for younger investors who may not have amassed the wealth yet, and then enabling them to step into a new type of service model again as their wealth grows over time, as their life and their wealth gain complexity, and they need more really human guidance and advice.
Yeah, well, you see a lot of the banks have certainly taking that approach, right? And they have the scale to do that, the self-directed accounts, the robo advisors, and then the advisory channel as well. Mike, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Mike Foy of JD Power. Well, that wraps up this edition of Strictly Money. If you have thoughts about this episode, please send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching. We'll see you again next week. Until then, stay well, stay wise, and stay wealthy.